Should you stop working? That question keeps you up at night, doesn't it? Not because you don't know the financial math. You've run those numbers 100 times. It's because this decision feels like it's about everything else. Who you are, what you're worth, whether you'll matter when you're no longer producing. The stakes are real. The next 10, maybe 20 years of your life hang on this choice. Here's what most people do. They stay stuck. They tell themselves 1 more year, until that becomes 5 more years. They make retirement decisions based on anxiety, not wisdom. They confuse fear with prudence. And they wake up one day realizing they traded years they can't get back for security they didn't actually need. The Stoics, specifically Seneca and Marcus Aurelius, had something powerful to say about this exact decision. Not vague platitudes about following your dreams. Real, practical frameworks for distinguishing between rational necessity and irrational fear. For understanding what you actually control in this decision versus what you're just projecting. For knowing when you're choosing wisely versus when you're just postponing an inevitable reckoning. Over the next 27 minutes, I'm going to walk you through the Stoic framework for retirement decisions. You'll get the essential questions that reveal what's really driving your hesitation. The common traps that keep people working long past when they should have stopped. And a practical checklist for making this decision with clarity instead of dread. By the end, you'll know exactly how to approach this question, and you'll have the tools to answer it with confidence. If this resonates, click the like button now. It helps this channel reach more people navigating these same decisions. Let's begin. Here's what you're actually asking when you ask, when should I retire? You're not really asking about your 401k balance or your Social Security timing. Those are important, sure, but they're not what's keeping you paralyzed. What you're really asking is, who will I be when I'm no longer working? And underneath that, will I still matter? Will I have purpose? Will I be safe? That's why this retirement decision feels so heavy. It's not one question. It's 20 questions disguised as one. It's identity, purpose, security, relevance, and mortality all wrapped together. Most people spend months or years circling this decision because they're trying to answer all of those questions simultaneously. And they can't, so they just keep working. Seneca understood this paralysis intimately. And On the Brevity of Life, he wrote about people who postpone living until conditions are perfect, until they have enough money, enough security, enough certainty. And he was brutal in his assessment. These people die before they've ever truly lived. Not because they didn't have time, but because they kept treating time as if it were infinite. Here's what Seneca would tell you about your retirement decision. The question isn't, when should I stop working? The question is, how many years do I have left, and what am I willing to trade them for? That's a completely different question. It moves you from passive uncertainty to active choice. From can I afford to retire to can I afford not to? But before you can answer that honestly, you need to understand what's really holding you back. And for most people over 50, the biggest obstacle isn't money. It's identity, which brings us to the fear that nobody wants to admit they have. Marcus Aurelius ran the Roman Empire, emperor, commander of armies, the most powerful man in the known world. And yet, in his private journals, what we now call the Meditations, he constantly reminded himself, "You are not your title. You are not your function. You are not what you do." Why would the Emperor of Rome need to remind himself of that? Because he understood something most people never grasp. Our work becomes our identity. And when our identity is our work, the thought of stopping work feels like psychological suicide. It feels like erasing yourself. This is the real fear beneath retirement anxiety. You've spent 30, 40, maybe 50 years building an identity around what you do. I'm a lawyer. I'm an engineer. I'm a manager. That identity gave you structure, purpose, social standing, and a clear answer to what do you do. Now you're supposed to just let that go and become what? A retiree? That word feels like death. Marcus Aurelius would tell you that you've made a category error. Your work is something you do, not something you are. Your character, your rationality, your virtue, your capacity for wisdom, that's who you are. Your job title is just temporary clothing, useful while you wear it, but ultimately not you. Here's the test. If you lost your job tomorrow through no fault of your own, company closed, industry collapsed, whatever, would you cease to exist? Of course not. You'd still be you. The same person, the same mind, the same values. The only difference is the external structure would be gone. And here's what's critical to understand. Retirement is you choosing to remove that external structure rather than having it removed from you. The people who struggle most with a retirement decision are the people who've let work become psychological armor. It protects them from having to answer deeper questions about who they are and what matters. And that armor becomes a prison, which leads us to the most uncomfortable truth about time that Seneca forces us to face. Seneca opens on the brevity of life with a statement that should unsettle anyone over 50. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Read that again. Your problem isn't that life is short. Your problem is that you're squandering what remains. He goes on. People treat time as if it's infinite and renewable. They'll protect their money fiercely, but they throw their hours away like they're worthless. They let other people consume their time. They postpone living for someday that never comes. And then they arrive at old age having never actually lived, just worked, accumulated, and deferred. Now apply that to your retirement decision. Let's do some brutal math. If you're 60 and you live to 85, not guaranteed, but possible, you have 25 years left. 300 months. About 9,000 days. That's what's on the table. That's your remaining allocation of the only non-renewable resource you have. Now, one more year of working doesn't sound like much, does it? It's just 1 year. Except it's not. It's 365 of those 9,000 days. 4% of your remaining life. And if you're working 50 weeks a year, 40 hours a week, that's 2,000 hours. Hours you can't get back. Hours you're trading for. What exactly? Here's where Seneca gets really uncomfortable. He'd ask you, what are you getting in that extra year that's worth 4% of your remaining life? More money you probably don't need. The comfort of routine. The avoidance of facing what comes next. Status you'll lose anyway the moment you retire. Because whatever it is, you're not just spending money to get it. You're spending time. Your most limited, most precious, completely non-renewable resource. The hidden cost of one more year compounds. It's not just that year. It's that you're older, potentially less healthy, less energetic the following year. You're not banking time. You're spending it on the assumption that the future, you will have unlimited access to what you're sacrificing now. That's the bet you're making every time you say, not yet. But maybe you're thinking, that's easy to say, but what if I don't have enough money? What if I retire and run out? That's the fear that trumps everything else. So let's address it head on with Stoic clarity about what you actually control. The Stoics had a foundational principle called the dichotomy of control. There are things you control and things you don't. Wisdom lies in focusing entirely on what you control and accepting with equanimity what you don't. Most retirement anxiety comes from confusing the two. Here's what you don't control: market returns, inflation rates, how long you'll live, future healthcare costs, whether the economy collapses, whether your investments perform as projected. You can plan for these variables, sure, but you cannot control them. And yet, people obsess over them. They run calculators modeling scenarios out to age 95 with different return assumptions and inflation rates. And they still can't decide because there are too many unknowns. Here's what you do control: your spending, your expectations, your definition of enough, your resourcefulness, your ability to adapt, your capacity to live with less if necessary. And this is where Seneca's wisdom about wealth becomes critical. In his letters, he constantly returns to one theme: the person who knows what is enough is rich. The person who always needs more is poor, regardless of what they have. Apply this to your retirement decision. The real question isn't, do I have enough money? The real question is, do I know what enough is for me? Because if you don't know what enough is, no amount will ever feel sufficient. You could have $5 million and still feel anxious about running out. Why? Because enough is undefined, which means it's infinite, which means it's unattainable. The Stoic approach: define enough with precision, not aspirationally. What you'd like to spend if money were infinite. Realistically, what you actually need to live well, adjusted for your values and priorities. For most people, this number is far lower than the number their anxiety generates. Your anxiety isn't calculating need. It's calculating worst-case scenarios plus a safety buffer plus status maintenance, plus the money you wish you'd had at 30. Here's a framework from Seneca. Distinguish between necessities, comforts, and luxuries. Necessities: shelter, food, healthcare, basic social connection. You must cover these. Comforts: a nicer home, travel, dining out, hobbies. These improve life quality significantly for relatively modest cost. Luxuries: status symbols, keeping up with peers, lifestyle inflation. These are infinite and meaningless. Most people's retirement anxiety is actually luxury anxiety, disguised as necessity anxiety. They're not afraid they won't be able to afford food. They're afraid they won't be able to maintain the lifestyle they've become accustomed to, which might include things they don't even value but have never questioned. The Stoic move is to separate these ruthlessly and realize your actual financial independence number is probably far lower than your fear number. But knowing this intellectually isn't enough. You need to answer some hard questions honestly. And that's exactly what we're going to do next. Marcus Aurelius had a practice. He'd ask himself piercing questions to cut through self-deception and get to truth. Not rhetorical questions, real questions that demanded honest answers. Here are 4 questions adapted from Stoic philosophy that will clarify your retirement decision faster than any financial calculator. Question 1. Am I working because I genuinely need the income? Or am I working because I'm afraid of what happens if I stop? Be brutally honest. If you have enough to cover your necessities and reasonable comforts, and you're still working, the reason is psychological, not financial. That doesn't make it invalid. Fear is real, but it means you're solving the wrong problem. You don't need more money. You need to address the fear. Question 2. If I stop working tomorrow, what would actually happen? Not what might happen in some catastrophic scenario, but what would really happen in the next month, the next year? You'd wake up without a schedule. You'd have freedom to structure your time. You'd lose your work identity. You'd potentially feel lost for a while. You'd need to figure out purpose beyond productivity. Now, are those outcomes catastrophic? Or are they just uncomfortable? There's a massive difference. Question 3. How much time do I realistically have left? And how much of it am I willing to trade for continued income or identity maintenance? If you're 62 and you work until 67, that's 5 years. 5 years that could be relatively healthy, energetic, capable years. What are you getting in exchange for those 5 years that you couldn't get by retiring now and adjusting your lifestyle? This isn't rhetorical. Calculate it. What's the actual trade? Question 4. Is my fear rational, based on real financial projections and genuine need, or emotional, based on catastrophic thinking and anxiety? Get your actual numbers. What do you have? What do you spend? What's the gap? If there's a real gap between assets and needs, okay, that's rational concern. But if your assets cover your needs and you're still afraid, that's emotional. And you need different tools than just work one more year. These 4 questions strip away the noise. Most people avoid them because the answers are uncomfortable. They reveal that the retirement decision isn't really about money or timing. It's about confronting uncertainty, redefining identity, and accepting that no amount of planning gives you complete control over the future. And when you start answering these questions honestly, something else becomes clear. You've probably fallen into one or more of the common traps that keep people working long past when they should have stopped. Let's identify those now. Trap 1. One more year becomes perpetual. You tell yourself you'll work one more year to hit a certain number or reach a milestone. That year passes, and now you have a new reason for one more year. This pattern can go on indefinitely. Why? Because the goal isn't actually a number. It's avoiding the decision. As long as you're working, you don't have to face what comes after. Seneca would say you're treating time as if it's renewable. You're acting like you can always get one more year back later. But you can't. Every year you trade for marginal financial gain is a year of your finite life spent in exchange for something that might not even matter. The trap closes when you realize you've been saying, one more year for 5 years, and now you're older, maybe less healthy, and you still haven't answered the underlying questions. Trap 2. Status and borrowed identity. Your job gives you social standing. When someone asks what you do, you have a clear, respectable answer. You're somebody. Retirement feels like becoming nobody. So you keep working, not because you need the money or even enjoy the work, but because you're terrified of losing your social position. Marcus Aurelius would ask, whose opinion are you living for? What do you actually lose if you're no longer senior vice president, or partner, or whatever title you carry? You lose a label. That's it. The people whose respect depends on your title aren't people whose respect matters. This trap is insidious because it masquerades as prudence or ambition when it's actually just fear of social irrelevance. Trap 3. Projecting boredom that never materializes. What would I even do all day? That's the question people ask when they're considering retirement, and it sounds reasonable. Except here's what actually happens. You retire, and within weeks or months, you wonder how you ever had time to work. You rediscover hobbies. You deepen relationships. You pursue interests you'd shelved for decades. You sleep properly. You read. You think. The people who get bored in retirement are people who never developed an interior life, who defined themselves entirely by productivity and external validation. For everyone else, time is the gift, not the curse. You're not projecting actual boredom. You're projecting your current state, where you're exhausted and can barely imagine having energy for anything, onto a future where you're rested and have space to be curious again. Trap 4. listening to advice from people who are running from their own fears. Your still working friends tell you not to retire. Your family members express concern. Your financial advisor suggests a few more years to be safe. And maybe some of this advice is sound, but ask yourself, are these people speaking from wisdom or from their own anxiety? Your working friends might be defending their own choice to keep working. Your family might be projecting their fears about their own futures onto you. Your advisor might be conservative by nature or incentivized to keep your assets under management longer. None of this means they're wrong, but it means you need to separate their fears from your reality. These traps work because they're partially true. One more year does add to your savings. Your identity is partly tied to your work. You might be bored for a month or two. Some caution is warranted. But when these partial truths become reasons to defer indefinitely, they've become traps. And the way out is a clear decision framework. Here's your Stoic framework for this retirement decision. For steps, grounded in the principles we've covered. Work through these systematically, and you'll have clarity. Step 1. Calculate your realistic remaining time. Not to be morbid, but to be honest. If you're 60 and you assume you'll live to 85, that's 25 years. But how many of those years will you be healthy enough to travel, pursue active hobbies, engage fully? Maybe the first 10 or 15 are your strong years. Write that number down. That's your budget. Everything else in this framework is about how you want to spend that budget. Step 2. Assess your resources against your actual needs. Not your wants, not your aspirational lifestyle, your actual needs plus reasonable comforts. Run the numbers. What do you have in assets? What's your expected Social Security or pension? What do you realistically spend now? And what would you spend in retirement? If your assets can generate enough to cover your needs indefinitely, through some combination of withdrawals, Social Security, and pensions, then your financial concern is emotional, not rational. If there's a real gap, okay. Now you're problem solving. Can you reduce expenses? Can you work part-time instead of full-time? Can you delay retirement by 1 or 2 years while making other changes? This is where the dichotomy of control applies. You control your spending and expectations. You don't control market returns. Focus on what you control. Step 3. Name your fears specifically and test them. Write down everything you're afraid will happen if you retire. I'll run out of money. I'll be bored. I'll lose my identity. My spouse and I will drive each other crazy. I'll become irrelevant. Now, for each fear, ask, is this based on evidence or projection? What would I do if this actually happened? Is this catastrophic or just uncomfortable? Most fears collapse under scrutiny. I'll run out of money becomes, I might need to adjust spending in my 80s if markets underperform. I'll be bored becomes, I'll need to actively structure my time for the first few months. I'll lose my identity becomes, I'll need to redefine myself beyond my job title. These are challenges, not catastrophes. Step 4. Apply the Stoic test. Imagine you make the retirement decision. You stop working. Now, 6 months later, how do you feel? If the answer is relief, peace, engagement with life, and maybe some adjustment challenges, that's wisdom calling you forward. If the answer is deep regret, financial panic, and existential emptiness, then you're not ready, and you need to address what's missing. Now flip it. Imagine you decide to keep working for 5 more years. 5 years from now, how do you feel? If the answer is satisfaction that you built more security and you're still healthy and engaged, fine. Maybe that's right for you. But if the answer is regret that you spent 5 more years in a job you didn't love, trading your strong years for money you didn't need, that's your answer. You should have stopped earlier. Here's your checklist. Have I separated real financial need from emotional anxiety? Have I defined enough with precision? Have I named and tested my specific fears? Have I calculated my realistic remaining time? Have I identified which concerns I actually control? Can I articulate what I'll do with my time if I retire? Am I making this decision, or am I just deferring it again? Work through this framework honestly, and the decision becomes clear. But clarity isn't the same as certainty. So how do you know you decided well? That's the final piece. Here's the Stoic measure of a good decision piece. Not certainty, not guaranteed outcomes, not the elimination of all risk piece. Marcus Aurelius wrote constantly about this distinction. You can't control whether your decision produces perfect results. You can only control whether you made the decision rationally, based on what you knew and valued at the time. If you retire and you feel peace, even alongside some nervousness or adjustment discomfort, that's wisdom. Peace doesn't mean everything is easy. It means you're not fighting yourself. You're not waking up at 3 in the morning with corrosive regret. You're not second-guessing constantly. You made a choice aligned with your values and your rational assessment of your situation. That's as good as decisions get. Contrast that with anxiety. If you retire and you feel persistent, grinding anxiety, not the normal adjustment nerves, but deep financial panic or existential emptiness, that's your signal that either you retired prematurely or you haven't addressed the underlying issues: identity, purpose, structure. Anxiety is different from the discomfort of transition. Anxiety says something is genuinely wrong. The same applies if you decide to keep working. If you continue working and you feel peace, you're engaged, you're building towards something meaningful, you're glad you're doing this, fine. That's a valid choice. But if you continue working and you feel resentful, exhausted, or like you're trading your life for safety you don't actually need, that's anxiety disguised as prudence. Marcus Aurelius had a practice. At the end of each day, he'd review his actions and ask, did I live according to reason today? Did I act with virtue? He wasn't asking if everything worked out perfectly. He was asking if he acted in alignment with his principles. That's the standard. Apply it to this retirement decision. Did you make the choice based on clear thinking and honest self-assessment? Or did you make it or defer it based on fear, inertia, or other people's expectations? If it's the former, you decided well. If it's the latter, you're still avoiding the decision. Here's the final truth. There's no perfect time to retire. There's only the time that's right for you, based on your specific circumstances, values, and clear-eyed understanding of what you're trading. Some people should retire at 55. Some people should work into their 70s. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that you're making an intentional choice, not drifting into either outcome by default. The Stoics would tell you this. You can't eliminate uncertainty. You can't guarantee outcomes. But you can make decisions with wisdom, and then live with those decisions without regret. That's the most any of us can do. And that's enough. So here's where we are. You have the Stoic framework. Calculate your time. Assess your real resources against real needs. Name and test your fears. And measure your decision by peace, not perfection. You have the 4 essential questions that cut through the noise. You know the common traps. 1 more year syndrome, borrowed identity, projected boredom, other people's fears. The retirement decision isn't about having every variable locked down. It's about knowing the difference between rational planning and irrational anxiety, between building real security and postponing an inevitable confrontation with who you are beyond your work. Seneca and Marcus Aurelius give you the tools to make that distinction. My challenge to you: answer those 4 questions I gave you. Do it today. Write down your answers. Be honest. Don't let yourself drift for another month or year without facing what you're really asking. Because the cost of deferring isn't just money, it's time. And time, as Seneca reminds us, is the one thing you can't earn back. If this framework brought clarity, click the like button. It helps this channel reach others facing the same decision. If you want more philosophical wisdom applied to real life after 50, subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what's the biggest fear holding you back from this decision? Let's talk about it. See you tomorrow.